BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Welcome to this special Tuesday episode of Black Box Online Radio. I had started a segment about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey from 1996 called The Imperfect Murder here on BBOR, and that was coming out on the weekends. This one has been moved to Tuesday, though, so thank you to everyone who has been following along with these true crime discussions. Also, a big thank you to everyone who listened to yesterday's episode about the Zodiac Killer. And you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the murder of JonBenet Ramsey. On December 26 of 1996, JonBenet was found dead in her Boulder, Colorado home, and the other residents of the house were her mother Patsy, her father John Ramsey, and her brother Burke. There was a 2.5-page ransom note that was left behind, and I did an individual episode on the ransom note for the start of this series, but JonBenet was struck in the head with some type of blunt object that created an 8.5-inch crack in her skull. She was also strangled with a garrote. The items that were used to compose the garrote were all taken from the Ramsey house. One of the paintbrushes that belonged to a painting set that her mother Patsy had was broken, and then the rope and string was used to tie it around several times, turning it into a garrote, and that was used to strangle JonBenet. Now, according to the autopsy, she would have passed away from the head wound, but ultimately it was the strangulation that killed her. And even the detective Lou Smith, who was putting forward a case for an intruder, talked about how the head wound would not have been lethal, but according to the autopsy, that is very, very much in contradiction. So the head wound would have ultimately killed JonBenet. She was found in the basement with her hands tied above her head. She was also placed in a type of wine cellar that was within the basement. She had duct tape over her mouth, and there were a set of boot prints that were found surrounding the body that said the words high-tech, Hitec, high-tech. And as you can see from the title of this episode, I'm going to be talking about the case for an intruder. And it's going to happen in somewhat of a multifaceted way because I fully admit that this is one of the least popular opinions that I have. This interpretation of the evidence is something that I receive a lot of backlash for, making the claims that an intruder murdered JonBenet Ramsey, and that by an intruder I mean someone who was not John, Patsy, or Burke Ramsey, not one of those immediate family members. And what I think the evidence suggests is that there was someone who entered the home while the Ramseys were at the Christmas party on December 25th of 1996. This person was hiding in the basement, and the reason why the weapons and the items that were used, say, for making the garrote were chosen is because the person is simply trying to pass time. They may have been waiting for 2 hours or 3 hours for the Ramseys to come home. I believe that JonBenet was specifically targeted. I believe that she was tracked down by someone who was actually a sexual predator, and that they also wrote the ransom note as a diversion. I don't think the ransom note had any real value. I think it was written rather slowly and carefully, because it would have taken about 21 minutes to write the 2.5-page ransom note, and I believe somebody placed that at the foot of the stairs because they wanted the Ramseys to find that, and it was just about keeping someone out of the basement. Originally, I think they wanted to murder JonBenet, and then they wanted to put her body into a suitcase that was in the basement, and then they were going to try and take her out, but it was not practical. She wouldn't fit, or that her body was just not able to be placed into the suitcase. Fibers from JonBenet's clothing were found on the suitcase, so that's why I say that. But it was not a real kidnapping. They're just trying to make it look like a kidnapping. It's creating a diversion. It's trying to fool people. They're being deceptive. And one point, though, that I've had a very big reversal on over the years is, if you had asked me about this back in 2018, I would have said I thought there were 3 intruders, that this was actually a team of people, and all of the same stuff would be applying: sexual predators or people who were specifically targeting JonBenet. But I had to really take a step back and look at how and why. I mean, there might be fewer than 3 people, maybe 2, maybe 1. I'm really not even sure about that. But I think the items were taken from the Ramsey home simply because they're trying to just do something during this 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour gap while the Ramseys were at the Christmas party. Now let's talk about some of the evidence for an intruder. And this is, again, one of the things that I think is horribly unpopular, but it is what I genuinely think. After JonBenet was murdered, her parents went on television, and Patsy Ramsey gave a very flustered interview. People thought that she just seemed extremely sleepy, or that she appeared drugged up in their opinions. And I think that this was a big downfall moment for the Ramseys. I think this was the first domino going down. And people ultimately began to zone in on Patsy because they didn't like her behavior, they didn't like her personality, they didn't like her actions. They just began to become very suspicious of her. And I just think that she's a naturally awkward person. I think that she is someone who uses some very odd word choices when she is under stress. But that doesn't mean that she killed JonBenet, and it also doesn't mean that their son Burke killed JonBenet either. He falls into the exact same category. People will use certain aspects of his body language, or that he'll be laughing at inappropriate times. And this goes all the way back to 1996, 1997, when there are videos of him being interrogated. Then people are zoning in on him because they don't like his personality. And to me, that has no relevance in a murder investigation. How about who actually killed JonBenet? So let's look at some of the other points. Next, we have DNA. There were multiple places where DNA from an unknown male was found on JonBenet. One was on the band, like the waistband of her pants. There was touch DNA that was found on her legs, and she also had DNA under her fingernails. And even in Burke's famous Dr. Phil interview, Dr. Phil openly says, hey, all of this DNA evidence didn't match you. You should be exonerated. There's no way that you killed JonBenet. And people who are making claims about how John, Patsy, or Burke were responsible for the murder simply say that, oh, well, it was probably just transferred there some way, somehow. I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean that that DNA belongs to the killer. Fair enough. I mean, that's trying to be a defense attorney as opposed to actually trying to get to the facts. Remember, it's not about winning the argument. Who actually killed JonBenet? And I think that that DNA came from the killer. But there is also an article that was put out on Thought Catalog by Chrissy Stockton, just citing the source. And even though I think that an intruder killed JonBenet, this article really surprised me because it lists out all of the points for an intruder being responsible for her murder. However, I don't actually think that they're very good points. And like I was talking out to you guys on last week's True Crime Talk Radio in the morning, sometimes it might sound like a person is defending a position, other times it might sound like they are challenging a position, but you have to do that if you want to remain intellectually honest. So this is point number one for an intruder. John and Patsy were interviewed by the police for over 2 hours. Burke Ramsey was also interviewed within a few weeks of JonBenet's death. That's point number one about why an intruder murdered JonBenet. Well, what's your point? I mean, like, this is a ridiculous statement, because just because they were interviewed by the police and they didn't confess, that doesn't mean anything. I mean, they could have done it, or maybe they didn't do it. That is almost just kind of a neutral statement rather than looking at it in any other direction. Point number two. The existence of evidence that JonBenet has been sexually assaulted is one of the strongest indicators that this was an intruder crime, as it is much more rare for a husband and wife to work together to cover up abuse only one of them committed. This evidence is inconclusive, and it's not clear whether she was ever sexually abused or not. No semen was found in the official findings, and sexual assault cannot be ruled out. But as I understand, JonBenet was actually sexually assaulted with the head of the paintbrush, the one that had been broken and turned into the garrote. That's one thing that I encountered early on in these investigations. But a husband and wife aren't going to cover up someone's abuse. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. People will cover up for their partner. That happens all the time. I release shorts here on Black Box Online Radio. One of the most horrible stories that I ever covered in the shorts was the case of Laddie McGee, who was severely abused by the mother's boyfriend or stepfather, and he was tortured for a period of 2 months, and she covered up for him, like she was aiding and abetting. People will do things like that, so I don't really know why this person is saying that that's a bizarre thing. Okay, Point number 3, reasons why an intruder killed JonBenet. If someone was forced to kill their daughter to cover up their son's attack, I don't think strangulation with a garrote would have been the method they would have come up with. It's too personal and barbaric. I am at this in a completely different way. We're going to get to the same conclusion, but for a completely different reason. Personal, barbaric, I don't even care about those words. I think that it would just be horribly impractical for someone to try and cover up the scene by not making sure that JonBenet had passed away yet. Again, the strangulation is what killed her. And Lou Smith's granddaughters openly said on their podcast, this is just turning into the theory of somebody gave another person a ding on the head too hard and they made a silly story to cover it up. That's most likely not what happened. And what I think is more important with this statement is they could have tried to bring JonBenet to the hospital. They could have arranged a story that didn't involve strangling their own daughter to death. I mean, they wouldn't have made sure that there were no signs of life. I mean, they didn't. How would they have known that she was going to pass away from the head wound? I mean, just the fact that they were going through this whole thing, staging the scene by strangling their own daughter to cover up somebody getting hit in the head, I think it's preposterous. I think it's ridiculous. It's just so impractical. There would have been so many other ways. They could have just lied. They could have just made up some other type of excuse. And they could have just said that she had fallen and hit her head on something. They wouldn't have to write the ransom note and strangle her with a garrote to death, mind you. I mean, I just don't think it makes any sense at all. But that's my take on the subject. And we have a bloodstain on JonBenet's underwear was found to have DNA from two people who are not the Ramseys. So, again, there's going to be a lot of DNA evidence that's going to point away from the Ramseys. Point number 4. Burke has never been a suspect in this crime. He was interviewed by the police and by a child psychologist, none of whom walked away believing Burke had anything to do with JonBenet's murder. Since 9-year-olds aren't skilled liars or criminal masterminds, I believe the experts involved in the case would have a good handle on whether Burke seemed suspicious. This is also a ridiculous point. I mean, yes, 9-year-olds can be good liars. Yes, 9-year-olds can be manipulative. It all depends on their intelligence and their personality and their emotions that they are choosing to express or the lack thereof. And with Burke, if anything, I think he would be the type that would withhold emotions. I don't think he did it, but I mean, the people who are writing these things out, and it's not only this thought catalog article. It comes in all different places. They're just making this assumption that people can't be deceived, that the authorities can't be deceived, that people cannot put on an act and then stick to it. They really are, and I've gone through countless examples about the Ramsey case in the past. Now, here's another one. An unidentified boot print was found in the room where JonBenet's body was discovered. Absolutely. This is a stronger piece of evidence, and some people say that John Ramsey owned high-tech boots. Other people say that Burke Ramsey owned high-tech boots, but Burke would have been 9 years old at the time. I'm pretty sure they can tell if that boot print came from an adult or from a 9-year-old, because you're going to be dealing with different shoe sizes. For a long time, I thought that the boot print belonged to an individual named Michael Helgoth, who had a property dispute with the Ramseys. He owned a junkyard, or he worked at the junkyard that was on the outskirts of Boulder, and he committed suicide shortly after all of these events. And if you watch some documentaries about this, you might hear people say that, oh yeah, the boot print was definitively linked to Michael Helgoth. I mean, they do put that out there, but once I did a little bit more reading, it turned out that the boot print was only similar. Michael Helgoth owned a pair of high-tech boots, but they were a different size, and they really, really do misrepresent that in the documentaries. They'll even say stuff like, oh, the same types of soil was found in the basement that was found on Michael Helgoth's boots, and it also had the matching high-tech, the high-tech letters. But, you know, he didn't match because it was a different size boot, similar, but not the same. So I don't think Michael Helgoth was the person who left that boot print there. The next one is, police discovered one door to the Ramsey home was unlocked. There were also 2 basement windows that were left ajar to allow cords for Christmas lights to be plugged in from the outside. An additional basement window was broken prior to the events of JonBenet's murder and would have allowed entry into the Ramsey home. Detractors note that cobwebs, foliage, and debris in the vicinity of the basement window appear to be undisturbed. Well, no, I don't really think that they appear to be undisturbed. What I think is more possible is that the person could have actually just exited out the front door, and I don't think they would have been triggering any type of security system. But the whole point is that there are multiple entry points for the Ramseys home. An intruder could have done this with ease. Even when Lou Smith was in his 70s, he showed how you can sneak into the Ramsey home. But now here's another point. Marks on JonBenet's body indicate that a stun gun was used. I used to be a strong believer of the stun gun theory, but I actually think that they don't indicate a stun gun now. I think that that would have left a very different type of rose-colored mark that would have been around her. And what people who think that the people who think that Burke Ramsey was responsible for his sister's murder is that he was eating a bowl of pineapple and then she stole a piece of the pineapple and then he just hit her in a fit of rage, maybe with something such as a flashlight, and she was just completely unconscious, and he stabbed her with a toy train track as a way to revive her. Now, that has never been completely proven. Now, the train track is what caused the marks on JonBenet's body. It could be something else entirely, but I really think that that is just a giant question mark. The next point. There were over 100 burglaries in the Ramseys neighborhood in the months leading up to the murder. There was also more than a dozen registered sex offenders in the area. Due to JonBenet's higher profile status as a child beauty pageant participant, some believe that she was more at risk from stranger abduction as well as being targeted by a pedophile. Absolutely, absolutely. And ultimately, that's what I think happened. I think that somebody was familiar with her, either because of the pageant world or maybe just being in the neighborhood, and they watched her come in and out of the house with the Ramsey family, and that they zoned in on her. Lots of burglaries in the area, lots of sexual predators in the area. That's why I think JonBenet was targeted. And again, one of the things that complicates this case is the ransom note. And I think that it's just baloney, to be honest. It was just something that was made up to confuse people, and that's what it's done for over 25 years. Now we have the next one. There was no evidence of blood spatter found in the Ramseys' home. This means that JonBenet was likely dead or almost dead when the wound was administered. This contradicts the idea that strangulation was used as part of the cover-up after Burke lashed out fatally and struck his sister in the head. The strangulation came first. I've heard something very conflicting about that she was struck in the head and then she was, again, passing away. She would have passed away from the wound and then she was strangled afterward. And here is a statement about what happened to JonBenet, and this is a psychological profile, and this is a more likely perpetrator than someone from the Ramseys' home. So let's read the psychological profile here. JonBenet Ramsey's killer was a white male, relatively young, who had a personal grudge against John Ramsey and intended to carry it out by defiling and robbing him of one of the most valuable things in the world to him. He entered the house while the family was out, either through the basement window or through one of the many unaccounted-for keys to the Ramseys' house, carrying with him a stun gun and a roll of duct tape and a spool of cord. His intention was to incapacitate her, abduct her, and molest her. The ransom demand was an afterthought and could explain why it was written on materials found in the home. He had no intention of collecting such a low sum. He was also just trying to make a point and possibly cast suspicion on the Ramseys. It is also possible that he had already written a shorter, more succinct ransom note, but given the amount of time he had to himself, wrote a longer one. He went up to JonBenet's bedroom, incapacitated her with an air taser stun gun, which would not have made that much noise, taped her mouth shut, then took her downstairs. He began strangling her either during or right after the molestation, and whether he meant to or not caused her death. When he realized that he had done the job and was finished, he gave her a quick blow to the head, and instead of taking her out, he fled the house in a panic. There's so many divided things that I have about this psychological profile. One of the things about the revenge aspect of this, maybe, I can't really make any type of determination like that. I mean, we're talking about motive versus looking at the evidence, but this point about how somebody was targeting her, somebody just went in kind of with their own key, that is completely plausible. But this also goes to show that JonBenet was specifically targeted because of her appearance So this is a combination of revenge as well as someone who was a sexual predator. But the point here, though, about the air taser stun gun, I mean, I'm really divided on that. I'm very torn on that. Now, this is also just saying that the primary focus is molestation. And yes, absolutely. I have said so many of these things already in this episode. So some of it does line up. For example, such as this was a sexual predator who wanted to take JonBenet's body out of the home. There was no real ransom demand. There was no real desire to collect or claim the money. I completely agree with all of that. So I'm about 50-50 on this psychological profile. And then the final point here is that the Boulder police never felt they had a strong enough case to officially charge the Ramseys with the crime. Well, there is the book Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, which is one that I've been discussing with you guys. That's why I chose to call this the Imperfect Murder. And it gets that name, Perfect Murder, Perfect Town, because if I understand Lawrence Schiller's analysis of this, it's that if that crime had taken place anywhere else, they would have had the opportunity to charge the Ramseys. It had to do with the jurisdiction, of Boulder, Colorado, and the district attorney's office, and they just had certain legal roadblocks that prevented them from charging the Ramseys. This is an episode that I think is very different because, as you heard, I don't think the Ramseys killed their daughter or that they covered it up. I also don't really like a lot of the explanations that have been provided about how an intruder committed these crimes. So I guess I've always been in my own world, so to speak. That might mean that I was completely wrong, or that might mean that I'm completely right. And I would love to know what you guys think. Please put your ideas about JonBenet in the comments section down below. Another aspect of the theory involving Burke that I've never truly been able to digest is that, all right, so Burke hits JonBenet in the head, and then he tries to revive her with the train track. Then does he strangle her? I mean, some people have said that they thought that Burke was actually trying to move her body by dragging it with the rope or string, and then John Ramsey was the one who made the garrote into a more not exactly sophisticated, but a more intricate. He made the more intricate garrote and then used that to kind of make it look like an intruder did it. And I just absolutely do not like that explanation at all. I just don't really think that human instinct would allow someone to just start dragging a 6-year-old by their head as a way to move her body. There would be so many other ways to do that. And I mean, even a 9-year-old is going to know that that's an impractical choice. Again, this stuff about how the Ramseys are covering it up makes no sense. Now, I just think that they're very implausible scenarios. But I would love to know what you guys think. Also, let's look at some of the stronger points. DNA evidence that is pointing towards somebody else. The fact that the boot print is pointing toward somebody else. The fact that the fibers are found on the suitcase. I mean, I just think that all of this is suggesting that somebody wanted to target JonBenet. They were trying to molest her. They're trying to get her body out of the house. It was impractical to do that, to put her in the suitcase, so they had to leave her there. But what do you think about any of my observations? What do you think about the psychological profile that was shared in that Thought Catalog article? And what do you think happened to JonBenet Ramsey? Anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is Ned DeHaan. And there is also BlackboxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram. And I know a lot of people aren't going to want to hear everything that I've said in this episode. And a lot of people don't like it when I'm kind of divided on some things or challenging things point by point. But again, you have to do that if you're just going to do this with any type of honesty. Those are my genuine and honest pieces of feedback. So what do you think happened to JonBenet? Put your ideas in the comment section down below, and until next time.